Hi everyone, welcome to the Future of Sustainability Reporting webinar, organized by CDL and the Singapore Sustainability Academy in partnership with SGX, the Singapore Institute of Directors, the Center for Governance and Sustainability at NUS Business School, the UN ESCAP Sustainable Business Network, and Global Compact Network Singapore. This will be the first of a webinar series which covers key topics and global trends on sustainability reporting. The Singapore Sustainability Academy, or SSA for short, was opened in 2017. It's Singapore's first major 3P partnership space dedicated to capacity building, thought leadership, and collaboration on climate action and sustainability best practices. Today's webinar will be moderated by Ms. Esther An, CDL's Chief Sustainability Officer, who has produced the very first sustainability report by a Singapore company using the GRI framework in 2008. She has since led the publication of 14 sustainability reports for CDL and has developed a reporting framework that harmonizes key reporting standards, adding IIRC to the GRI framework in 2015, embracing SDGs in 2016, Tcfd in 2017, SBTi in 2018, SASB in 2020, and CDSB in 2021. Do take part in the discussion by sharing your comments or questions using the Q&A feature. This 1 hour-long session is currently live on our Facebook page and will also be recorded and accessible on our CDL Sustainability YouTube page. Over to you, Esther.
Hello, greetings from Singapore, everyone. And we are very excited with actually 500 over registrations that we have received as of today. And most of them are actually from Singapore, 90%. The other 10% are from Europe and, in Asia as well. So inarguably, 2020, was a year of awakening of sustainability and climate action. And sustainability now is really a mainstream topic, on the political as well as business, arena. And on 5th June, on World Environment Day, G7 issued a statement, to back mandatory disclosure of climate risk by financial institutions and corporates, and especially using the Tcfd framework. And G20 is also in talks to support the same. And hot from the ovens, you may have already seen the announcement that SBTi and IIRC has made it official to form the Value Reporting Foundation. So let's ask ourselves that, is the harmonization of key reporting standards and framework, really a solution, a challenge, or an opportunity for reporters? Since last September, after the joint statement by the so-called the five, the gang of five, the five framework and standard setting institution, harmonization has become a hot topic. And how do we make sense of the complex matrix of acronym, the GRI, the CDP, the SBTi, IIRC, TCFD, CDSB, and all, and we are very, very delighted to have the expert panelists today with us who are very familiar with all these hot soup of acronyms. And they are, John Williams, who are actually sitting on the board of TCFD. And we are going to, really ask him a lot of questions about TCFD. And he is also the partner of sustainability and climate change. They are based out at in PwC London. And Pratima Devji, Regional Director of CDP Hong Kong. And then Abigail Ng is actually our Singapore Institute of Director, ESG Committee member, as well as the Executive Director of Monetary Authority of Singapore. And Rajas Chabara is the Managing Director of CSR Works International. And now we are very, very packed with, time and topics and all that. Let's start the ball rolling and to have our first panelist to give a little introduction of their work and the insight into sustainability reporting. And John, can we have you to start the conversation now? Thank you, John.
Of course you can, Esther, and thank you for continuing to show such leadership, for organising this event, for inviting me, and also to the 500 people who you managed to get registered, a real achievement. I'm going to start my journey in the world of sort of financial accounting and mathematics, which might seem an odd place to start for sustainability, but bear with me. when you look at reports and accounts and you see $1 million of sales, you know what that means. You know that sitting behind it is a sales ledger. You know in that ledger there will be volumes and value of goods sold. They'll be backed with invoices. There'll be an accounting standard around it that defines revenue recognition. And if you're sitting on a board of a company, your finance department is probably providing you that sales figure on a weekly basis. You're tracking that against budgets, you know what it means. And if you're an investor, you can look at those numbers and you know what sits behind it as all the appropriate controls, the data, the ledger. And the reason you know that is that the audit committee will have signed off on it and your auditors will have signed the accounts, hopefully without a qualification. What that has done is provided decision useful information, and it's created transparency and trust. Now imagine a world without any of those standards, a world without accountants, dare I even say, where sales were defined by each company. Some companies produced financial numbers, others just produced the volume of goods sold. There were frequent restatements because there were no standards, that no information was provided to the board, so they didn't really know how they were doing. Investors got some information from some companies some of the time, but it wasn't comparable. It wasn't decision useful. There was no transparency. There was no trust. The world I've just described is not too dissimilar to the world of sustainability reporting. Now, to be sure and to be clear, over the last 20 years, many organisations, including many on this call, CDP, GRI, SASB, Tcfd, etc., have put in a lot of work to drive forward sustainability reporting. But what we have is still quite a fragmented set of standards, no common metrics, some areas of ESG still quite hard to define. And so the world is moving from an era of individual standards, often created around specific needs, to a global standard. You know, I'm a great supporter of the IIRC and SBTi coming together. The work we did at Tcfd was very much to say, let's recognise the great work that's already been done and let's bring it together under a consistent framework. We did not want to create the 401st climate disclosure framework. We wanted to make sure that it was something that would help unify, and therefore we worked with the other standard setters on that. We know at the Tcfd it's also quite challenging. You know, whilst the rollout of companies reporting has been, really good since 2017, we know that the financial disclosures related to climate change are still very much in its nascency. We know scenario analysis is difficult, which is why we produce guidelines around scenario analysis and will continue to. We know understanding how to integrate into financial accounting and risk management systems is difficult. Again, we produced a guide with WBCSD to help reporters do that. And we found it hard to define a single metric or a consistent set of metrics around climate change that work for everyone. You know, we in our consultation document have proposed things like an implied temperature rise metric. I like it for its simplicity, but I know it's not a perfect metric. And therefore, last week we issued an updated metrics and targets guide, including something that we heard from stakeholders is we want companies' transition plans. How are they going to get from high carbon to low carbon made public, put to a shareholder vote? So actually, we can really see how a company is transitioning. Final point for me, the world of regulation is moving incredibly quickly. If I look at the UK, we have mandatory TCFD reporting in 2021. That's ambitious. It'll be for our premium listed larger companies, but over the next 2 years, all listed companies, private companies, and even limited liability partnerships will be expected to report in accordance with the TCFD. The EU has got an ambitious sustainable finance and sustainability plan, and its corporate sustainability reporting directive will again bring sustainability reporting into a mandatory area. The US under the Biden-Harris administration is moving very quickly. The first task on the first day of the new head of the SEC was to kick off a review of climate reporting as a matter of urgency. And as Esther said, the G7 meeting here in the UK as I speak, again calling for mandatory climate disclosure. And then taking it much closer to where most of the audience are, the MAS have issued its own environmental guidelines, and again, talking about a move to mandatory climate disclosure. So I'm really optimistic. I'm a big fan of convergence. I'm a big fan of standardization. We've got to build transparency and trust in sustainability reporting. And I think the people on this call can make a small contribution towards that. Unless you're Esther, in which case you've already made a big contribution. Esther, back to you.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, well, we all, this decade is called a decade of action. And the biggest alliance that we are looking at is actually a race to net zero, okay, the global race to zero, and decarbonization, how to lower our carbon footprint is actually one of the top priorities for many industries, and even including, construction and building industry, which we know that we have high impact, and we also know that we are in the position to how to decarbonize it. So next speaker is an expert in carbon disclosure, and they're not just looking at, the backward type of data, but also looking at forward-looking planning, how to mitigate, how to, lower the carbon footprint with strategies and all. And Pratima, over to you now to share CDP's, insights and experience. Yeah.
Thank you, Esther. And, I just wanted to start off with telling the audience that they should probably have a workshop with just you, especially since you're, I think within the CDP scores, you're definitely the only company to receive an A score in Southeast Asia for your climate change action and water security as well. So I just wanted to put that as a placeholder. But I think just to start off with my slides, and mine sort of just builds off on what John just spoke right now with respect to harmonization of standards and how do we kind of work working with companies and financial institutions. So let me just start off. The slides that I have, I'll just kind of jump into what is a quick introduction on CDP for those of you who are hearing about CDP for the first time. But then I really sort of want to jump into the trends and performances that we're seeing with respect to Asia Pacific. And it's not all bad news. Definitely, yes, for more acceleration, but definitely not bad news. And I want to use those data points that we receive as more as conversation starters for towards the rest of the panel sessions as well. So just to start off, CDP, we are a not-for-profit, and what we do is we work in 3 key areas. So one is we engage with corporates, with financial institutions, and with policy on the subject of climate change, sustainable forest practices, and water security. The reason why we sort of compartmentalize ourselves into this, because we realize that sustainability is a vast topic, and there are other experts out there such as GRI, and I'm sure Rajesh will have much more insight on the other aspects of sustainability as well. So we kind of focus specifically with climate change and then forests and water, because they are the most tangible proxies in terms of measurements that you can have for climate change. How we work with these 3 sort of key stakeholders, that is corporates, financial institutions, and policy, is through the Tcfd framework, which John just touched upon. And then we are also the co-founder of the Science-Based Targets Initiative. How these link together on the subject of climate change, the Tcfd is primarily focused on climate resilience. So essentially, it's an assessment, a current and a forward-looking assessment of how resilient your business operations are, and this includes your value chains, to climate change. And that could be from a physical perspective, but also a transition perspective. And I'll get a little bit more into details on that later on. The Tcfd framework is what we term as a gold standard framework that you can have with respect to financial assessment of climate-related risks and opportunities. And what we have essentially done is we've taken this framework and we've standardized it in 14 specific modules, and we send that to every single company that reports to us. And we ask them to report on every single question. So you are scored on every question, as well as the quality of the answer that you provide. And the whole idea is then to use this structured data set to get some key insights into transparency and action, but also then provide this data to the financial institutions that request for it, so they can then further on engage with their companies or use that information in investment due diligence, for example, or use it for new sustainable finance products and services. And we do this on a year-on-year basis, so it kind of provides a trend over a period of time. Once companies have determined how sufficiently resilient they are, and their operations are with respect to climate change, then we engage with these companies on what Esther just touched upon, which is decarbonization. So essentially, once you've had an assessment, how do you then fully decarbonize and be prepared in this transition to a low carbon economy? And that's where we've co-founded the Science Based Targets Initiative. Next slide, please. So this is just a look on the stakeholders that we work with. In Asia Pacific, there are a little over 3,000 companies that respond to us, but we've also taken these questionnaires down to sub-national government level, so essentially cities and states and regions, who also then start reporting to us on their climate resilience strategies. And so I just kind of wanted to give you a sense of the number of financial institutions as well as subnational governments that are already working in Asia Pacific on their climate resilience operation, with respect to climate resilience and their financial planning as well. Next slide, please. This is just a very brief breakup of how this geographic sense of where these companies are based today. The largest pool of companies that respond to us is actually from the Greater China region. And I wanted to kind of particularly point out that we essentially get data requests from two specific, what we term as authorities. So one is financial institutions that want to know what the investments that they have committed to or invested in, what are the climate resilience plans? So that data set is sent back to the financial institutions. The second data set is with respect to the supply chain. So we have a fair amount of multinational companies that come to us and say, we would like our supply chains to respond to us on TCFD, and we collect that data and provide that to the multinationals as well. So within these 3,000 companies, a large portion, I would say about 70%, are actually suppliers to multinational organizations who have started on their TCFD journey. And what we found is, despite the pandemic in 2020, we had a 20% increase in disclosure rates. And so we're fairly confident that, this trend is really set, and we should see an increase in disclosure for TCFD from now on. Next slide, please. So what are companies already reporting to us? 2/3 of these companies, so 2/3 of the 3,000 odd companies that report to us in Asia Pacific, they have already identified climate risks that will have a substantive impact on their business. And how we ask companies to respond is essentially, we ask them to provide a time frame. So, do they feel that there will be physical their physical assets will be impacted through climate change on a short, medium, long-term basis, what they expect that impact to be. So it could likely be that in the short term, there is no impact, but in the medium term, there could be a medium to high level impact. And so they need to start preparing for that. So what I'm trying to get at is, the TCFD is not just a reporting document, it's a strategy document. It fits into the enterprise risk management framework of companies, and it can really be used from a strategy perspective and a financial planning perspective from a short to long-term basis. Next slide, please. We've also found that companies who start off on this journey start having active emission reduction targets. And a couple of the examples on how they are also setting these targets is on the right-hand side. In fact, I wanted to point out, this was an interesting statistic that came out recently where we did an assessment of internal carbon pricing for companies, and just to see what is the action sort of happening in that area. And we found that Asia, amongst our global pool of companies that responded to us, the number of companies highest was actually in the Asia region, where they were already starting to set or planning to set internal price on carbon for their internal operations. Next slide, please. In 2020, and this is probably something that MAS will have more insight on, in 2020, what we also did was we took the Tcfd framework and we turned it slightly on its head when we sent it out to financial institutions to understand how many of them are actually assessing portfolio level emissions and reporting on it. And this is probably the first data set in the world today that gathered this information from a little over 300 financial institutions. As it's clear, 75% have not yet started responding on their financed emission, but the 25% that did, on an average, responded that at a portfolio level, the emissions are about 700 times higher than their operational emissions. Next slide. For the companies that have started setting targets through the Tcfd framework, what we also find is they then start aligning these emission reduction targets to ensure that they're in line with the latest science, and they get them validated through the Science Based Targets Initiative. And we found that there was a 57% increase, year-on-year increase in the Asia Pacific region. So this is sort of really catching on with companies getting more interested on what they should do and what their business models would look like were they to fully transform in line with a 1.5 degree or well below 2 degree increase from pre-industrial levels. Next slide. This is just a quick distribution of science-based targets across Asia Pacific. The largest pool of companies that have committed are from Japan, and Japan actually has taken quite a holistic view on this. They also provide consultancy for smaller companies through the Ministry of Environment, for example, on decarbonization. In India, which is surprisingly the second largest in terms of setting science-based targets, this was actually driven through a incubator-led model for science-based targets, but also through initiatives taken on by some of the large businesses over there. Next slide. So just to kind of round up what I've been saying as of now, I think what we've found is companies have started assessing risk. They are able to find out in certain capacities on short, medium, and long-term risks that might be impacting their business operations. This is not necessarily fed into business strategy and financial planning, and this might probably kind of go back into some of the scenario planning that John just touched upon earlier. But it's a journey that has started, and I think that's what we are particularly optimistic about. We also feel companies have started with respect to risk management of direct emissions, but vast risk on emissions and physical risks or even transition risks actually lie within the supply chain, and that hasn't yet come in. So what we start advising companies is to really have a more comprehensive approach to risk management. And the third, of course, is for companies that have done number 1 and number 2, is to reach to number 3, which is start thinking about fully decarbonizing in line with what the Paris Agreement is aiming for. So I'll just stop here and look forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you, Pratima. Actually, thank you for all the audience. Also, a lot of questions are coming in already, and some of the questions actually about SBTi, and Pratima has more or less addressed to it. Maybe we can also elaborate a little bit more. But before that, shall we finish all the introductions first? Abigail, I have to, pass the stage to you. And first, congratulations to MAS on the publication of your very first sustainability report. And I have, go through it. It's really a treasure trove of information and all the initiatives and policies that as a central bank, as a, monetary authority, how you have actually stepped up so much, to really push the agenda of sustainability reporting, sustainable finance, and a lot of, informations are there. And I believe that your report is probably one of the very few, issued by monetary authority in the global market. So without further ado, over to you, Abigail.
Hi, Esther. Hi, everybody. Thanks very much, Esther, for having me here today. And thank you for your very kind words about the inaugural report. It's something that we've been working on. It's working hard on, and I'm glad that you find it useful. We do put a lot of information there, so I encourage everybody to take a look at it. And, for the parts that anybody wants to follow up, I'm sure we'll be happy to also have further engagements. Just switching gears a little bit, especially for the international audience, just here to share a little bit about MES's Green Finance Action Plan, which was launched in 2019. And I may be preaching to the converted here today, but climate change is obviously an existential challenge, right? Facing both our current generation and future generations. And I think we all know that concerted action is really necessary for the world to transition into a sustainable future. So kind of like narrowing it down to the financial system, climate change actually presents very significant risks to the financial system, both in terms of physical as well as transition risks. And at the same time, the financial sector itself has to play a key role in this fight against climate change. So for MAS, we are integrated financial sector regulator. We are also a central bank. We also have a developer. So in wearing all those hats, we are doing our part to fight against climate change. So as I mentioned, this is our Green Finance Action Plan, or we call it the GFAP. It was introduced in December 2019 and updated last year. So it aims to set out our goals, how to support a sustainable Singapore. And we're also hoping to facilitate Asia's transition to a low carbon and sustainable future. As Singapore is a global financial center, we have to establish robust standards, good practices, and deep expertise here. And we also want to play a core role in channeling capital towards Asia's transition needs, especially in the energy sector, given the prevalence of fossil fuels in the region. So this has to be a just and equitable transition that has to balance economic and social development with sustainability goals. So just to take everybody through a little bit, our GFAP has actually 4 prongs. As I mentioned, it was updated recently. So we take this as kind of like a living blueprint, and it will be continually updated to reflect fast-moving domestic and international developments. So first, right at the top, something close to my heart as I come from a securities regulator side of the house in MAS. As a financial sector regulator, MAS aims to build up the resilience of our financial sector to climate change and environmental risk. So we do it in 2 broad ways. One is promoting high quality sustainability related disclosures, something I think close to John's heart as well, and enhancing environmental risk management in our financial institutions. So to speak to strengthening disclosures, MAS has publicly supported recommendations of the TCFD since 2017, and so has the Singapore Exchange. As you all know, the TCFD recommendations are regarded as international best practice for climate-related financial disclosures by corporates and financial institutions. So domestically, MAS already today expects our FIs, our financial institutions, to disclose in accordance with well-regarded international reporting frameworks, and we do say such as TCFD. You might also know, and as our MD also mentioned when we launched our sustainability report, we are working with the SGX, the exchange, to soon put out a consult to the industry on moving listed corporates and listed entities towards mandated climate-related reporting. And this is to be in line with the TCFD recommendations. So in addition to the domestic arena, which we are obviously trying to move on, we are also actively involved in various regional and international fora to improve the quality of sustainability disclosures and to reduce market fragmentation. Esther referred to this very early on about it being an alphabet soup of sustainability standard setters, and I think we can see slowly like the group of 5 coming together, and most recently the twinning of the other standard setters. So just to share in particular, MAS is plugged into the IOSCO Sustainable Task Force, and we are currently co-leading with the US SEC a technical expert group. We are working with the IFRS Foundation to study what they hope to create, which is a global sustainable reporting standard setting body, right, under the IFRS. We are actually looking to see if the IFRS is going to be able to develop a set of what we call baseline climate-related financial sustainability disclosure requirements. And this baseline would be something we hope that industries there'll be industry-specific guidance as well. And these baseline standards, we hope, will be something jurisdictions can adopt. And if they wish to, they can supplement and add on and overlay their own domestic jurisdictional needs as well. Just to touch a little bit as well on financial institutions, we had released earlier on the environmental risk management guidelines. This was worked on with the industry. It's a co-drafted set of guidelines. And we're also going to develop a framework to stress test the resilience of the financial sector to climate risk. So that's kind of like the broad work that we do as a financial sector regulator. Just to go through briefly the other 3 boxes. So we also support the development of sustainable finance markets. So you might have heard of our Sustainable Bond Grant Scheme, our Green and Sustainability Linked Loan Grant Scheme. These basically cover costs of these instruments to support corporates and SMEs to finance their projects and investments. We ourselves also trying to integrate climate and environmental considerations in our own investment activities. You might know we launched a US $2 billion green investments program, under which MAS is allocating US $1.8 billion. We've appointed 5 asset managers to manage new equity and fixed income mandates. And these mandates will be focused on climate change and the environment. The next box is we want to build on our smart nation ambition. So we want to have smart and green financing center as well. We do this through funding green fintech and building tech platforms as well. And the 4th prong, I think that's really important, and it's a horizontal that underpins everything as well, is to deepen knowledge and capabilities here. Capacity building is really important in this space. So we want to build a really deep pool of Asia-centric research and talent in sustainable finance. We do this by anchoring research clusters, centers of excellence, and think tanks. So I'm very proud that we've established, together with SMU and Imperial College, the Singapore Green Finance Center, and this is Southeast Asia's first dedicated Green Finance Center of Excellence. So that's kind of like a whirlwind tour through our GFAP, and I'm happy to take questions or discuss a little bit more about our priorities. Thanks, Esther.
Thank you, Abigail. It's really, really good to see, the authority is taking the lead to drive, change and a sustainable finance as well. And Rajesh, you are a guru in sustainability reporting, and most, if not all, the standards and the framework, as well as the global sustainability ratings and rankings, the Dow Jones and whatnot. You are really an expert in this. So maybe you can, take over now to share with us your thoughts and what is the likely, the progress of harmonization, which is really, a subject that you are very, very familiar with. Yeah, over to you, Rajesh.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, Esther. It's an honor to be on this extraordinary panel with such distinguished speakers. And it's very special to have you as the moderator, Esther. And a big hello to those who are watching this webinar. I'm the founder and managing director of CSR Works International Singapore. CSR Works is the oldest sustainability services firm in the region. We have 3 pillars: consulting, training, and thought leadership. We have strong partnerships with GRI, the IIRC, SSB, CDP, EcoVadis, Accountability, and S&P Global. So naturally, we help clients with sustainability reporting, integrated reporting, SASB, Tcfd, CDP, science-based targets, DJSI, FTSE for Good, EcoVadis, and much more. Our thought leadership pillar has 3 flagship programs: Asia Sustainability Reporting Awards, Asia Sustainability Reporting Summit, and Asia's Top Sustainability Superwomen. This is the 4th year of Asia's Top Sustainability Superwomen, and I'm happy to recall that Esther featured in the first edition of Asia's Top Sustainability Superwomen 4 years ago. If we were to launch the world's top sustainability superwomen, I'm sure Esther would make it to the first edition. Now let's turn to the topic today. You know, we survived the credit crisis. Now we are fighting a tough battle against COVID-19. The next knocking on our doors is climate. COVID-19 is the worst pandemic in over 100 years. More than 3.7 million people have died, and 174 million people are still infected. Climate crash will be many times more catastrophic. In a worst case scenario, much of the planet will become uninhabitable. COVID is killing humans, at least for now. An extreme change in climate will destroy everything that is life. If there is no planet, there will be no markets, and then there'll be no business. We cannot pass a broken planet to our children. We have to fix it now. And there is only one way to fix it. We all have to come together: businesses, government, NGOs, societies, and individuals. That brings us to sustainability reporting. We need high quality disclosure to make reliable decisions for sustainable growth that benefits everyone. Decision useful reporting will be possible if standard setters collaborate and not compete with each other. In my view, TCFD provides a robust roadmap for stopping the climate crisis. Together with the science-based targets and CDP, TCFD is the perfect cocktail of vaccines that the planet needs. So thank you, Esther, for convening this panel today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Rajas, just a follow-up on what you have shared. Thank you so much for sharing this. Is harmonization possible or advisable at all, you know, from your perspective as an advisory? Because we know the pain of reporter. Corporates are now under a lot of pressure, you know, a lot of mandatory regulation, a lot of, you know, investors message that we, you know, industry companies are not only expected to have a climate strategy, but even a net zero strategy, to be specific. Otherwise, you will risk being, you know, screened out from the investment and all. So, and then reporting is where investors and, you know, regulators, financial, and the stakeholder to gather information from us. But there are really a lot of acronyms there. So what we have done is more like to bring, you know, it's like when you're at the buffet table, there are just so many things that you just can't stomach everything. So in order to tell our story, I have to pick from, you know, the whole table of, you know, acronym, which are the best for us. But I mean, from my humble experiences, there are sectoral difference, there are geographical difference, there's industrial difference, and there are some SME, some are large cap, so some are global, some are local. So how do we find a dish, you know, they pick the ingredients, you know, like the top chef, you know, pick the right ingredients to really produce a report that investors want. So maybe you can share a little bit on that, with your experience advising, so many companies. And I'm also looking at the chat box. Panelists, please help me. And the question seems to come in much faster than I expected to be. So Pratima seems to be quite a few questions is on, targeting CDP, and John also about TCFD. How do you give some tips and all that? So can we have Rajesh first to talk a little bit about what are the really useful practical tips to help reporters to harmonize? How many standards will be good, or 2, 3, 4, 5, or what? Yeah, thank you, Rajesh.
Thanks, Esther. So you're right, there are too many alphabets, and people call it the alphabet soup, and I like calling it alphabet curry because that's what I like. So there is a clutter. That's very true, and clutter creates confusion. The market needs clarity and comparability to make the right decisions. Leading standards have made public commitment to work together rather than competing with each other. And as you mentioned, the IIRC and Svti have already merged. Actually, yesterday they announced they made the final official announcement to become the Value Reporting Foundation. So we should expect a global reporting system where various standards and frameworks, they complement each other and they coexist peacefully. That's what we are advising our clients, to use a combination of standards and frameworks that best serve stakeholders' information needs. But then, we need to go back to the core of these different alphabets and different standards and where they're coming from and what's the best way to approach that. So can I request Tracy to bring up those 2 slides? So here are the first slide that you see. Now, if you look at all the information needs that's there in the marketplace, I divide that in 3 broad groups. So the first one is stakeholders who are looking for information, how a business is contributing to sustainable development, how a business is managing its impact on the economy, the environment and society. So that's where you have GRI standards, and that's where you have SDGs, and they do a nice job helping a company to really communicate their sustainable development story. Then there's a second group of information users, which says that we want to know how the enterprise creates value. We want to know how company creates value in the short, medium, and long term. And this information is really prized by, say, the providers of capital and investors. That's where you have the International Integrated Reporting Council's Integrated Reporting Framework, and also SASB standards. So they both are investor focused. And that's why it made a lot of sense for these 2 to come together and become one. And then there is a third, but interconnected with the second one, is where very specific information investors are looking for, how resilient is the business of the company? What's the financial resilience? How ready is the business, say, to thrive and to grow and to do well over the next 50 to 100 years time? And that's where you have Tcfd, which looks at climate change, which is a long-term risk, takes a very long-term horizon. And also it has overlaps with SASB standards. Now, if you look at these 3, in my view, they are not independent. They are highly interconnected, and there's a lot of overlaps. I cannot imagine a company without making a contribution, a positive contribution to sustainable development by managing its impact, being able to create value for itself in the short, medium, and long term. So pretty much you need to have that first in place before you start worrying about how you're creating value through business model and a lot of other things. And these 2 in place prepare you to address all those issues which will make you future fit and ready for the future. So this is how I look at it. So how we use this whole availability of the whole cohort of gangs of standards and frameworks. Let's go to the next slide. So here what it looks like. So this is what we are seeing in the marketplace already happening. So if you are a reporting organization, this is what you do, perhaps, in my view. You start with a sustainability report using the GRI standards, which helps you address the very fundamentals of sustainability, that how your business impacts, say, the economy, environment, and society. Once you're done with that, then you look around yourself, and there you have all these alphabets and all these standards and frameworks. And as Esther was saying, then you start pick and choose which ones of these you want to use. And how you decide that? You decide that purely on the basis of what your stakeholders are telling you, what information your stakeholders need. Because if you remember my first slide, so the information needed about the sustainable development are general stakeholders. They want to see that how you're managing your impact. But if you look at the other two parts of that circle that you saw there, that information is needed by investors and shareholders, because they want to see how you create value and how you are managing financially material risks and opportunities. Now, this is what's going to happen. So you look at, you prepare a report, then you see what the regulators want, then you align with SDGs, you look at climate change and a whole lot of things. Now, if you want to see a good example of somebody who does this very, very well in a fantastic, extraordinary manner, all you have to do is go and look up CDL's Integrated Sustainability Report. I think nobody else does this better than them, integrating, bringing all these frameworks and standards together, and really putting out communication which is needed by their different, diverse stakeholders.
Thank you, Rajesh. Really appreciate that. It took us 14 years, to walk the journey and pull the right, ingredients to cook this dish, So actually, I ran through a lot of questions and down the chat box and also Q&A. I think I need to bring John back, seems to have quite a lot of strong interest on TCFD, especially because now climate is definitely on the top of the agenda of many companies, many industry, whether you are the oil and gas company, property, transport, or whatever. How do you make sense of ESG, make business and financial sense of ESG and report it, really the so-called make ESG the really financial related, disclosure and share it with us. And I think that I would also like to bring to the attention of the practical guides to sustainability reporting using GRI and SSA. There has been just quite a recent report, and I understand that PwC is actually playing a key role behind this guideline and report. Maybe over to you to share that address quite a number of questions in the chat box already. Yeah.
Well, that's great, Esther. Let me start with TCFD, and I guess just some practical thoughts as to how to use it. What we wanted to do with the TCFD is to give one simple framework that could be used by any company anywhere in the world. And so we had to get the balance between very prescriptive guidance and a set of sort of principles and a framework. But essentially, there are 4 areas that you need to focus on, and I would suggest they're focused on in this order. The first thing is you've got to understand what scenario you may face in the future. Now, what is a scenario? It's not a forecast, it's a possible future state. And initially, those scenarios should be a conversation. It should be a narrative where you think through what are the different physical and transition risk scenarios I may face. Do I think I'm exposed to flooding or tropical cyclones? Or do I think I'm more exposed to a carbon price or vehicle emission standards or the phase out of coal in my country, because that's the choice the government have made? And that is really a sort of facilitated narrative that gets you to here are 2 or 3 scenarios that we think could affect us. And if you've made a net zero commitment, one of those scenarios has to be a 1.5 degree scenario. Otherwise, you've made a commitment, but you've not got it into your planning. And really, it's a case of then saying, well, which would be the most material? Because I've got to start somewhere. And at that point, you can then start saying, well, how could I quantify it? Do I understand what $160 per ton carbon price, which is the price that the NGFS have put out as being necessary to achieve 1.5 degrees. Now, is that going to impact my business either directly because I'm emitting carbon, or indirectly because it could invoke an oil price shock in an economy very dependent on fossil fuels? If you conclude that there may be an impact on your business or your strategy, the next thing is to say, well, what's my risk management framework to identify, manage and mitigate those risks? So for example, if I've done a carbon price scenario at $160 and I believe that my thermal coal business could be impaired from an EBITDA point of view, but actually one of my other businesses, perhaps I've got a uranium mining business which will benefit from nuclear for the next 10, 20 years. What am I going to do to manage the risks in my thermal coal business? Am I going to sell the business? Am I going to try and reduce the carbon emissions? Am I going to think about acquiring a carbon negative asset that will enable me to offset those as I aim for net zero? You've then got to put some governance around it. So how competent is our board? Do they actually believe these scenarios? Are they bought into them? Do we have people within our executive structure in commerce and operations and risk and finance who can understand this, and how does it all tie together? So much the same as any other issue, what is your governance structure? We've done a report on what good practice reporting looks like. This is a PwC report, and we've put some examples of good governance structures where they're integrated into the way that broader issues are managed. And then, of course, I've got to have some metrics and some targets. And of course, I'm going to have scope 1, 2, and where appropriate, scope 3 emissions. But I probably, if I've made a net zero commitment, want to say, well, how do I get to 1.5 degrees? And where today are my operations equivalent to? So that's the idea of an implied temperaturized metric. So I can look at, if I didn't do anything, what temperaturized would I cause? And most companies I see are really on a 3 to 3.5% implied temperature rise. Certainly the London Stock Exchange at 2.9 degrees, as a stock market has got a way to go. So I think that's a sort of practical guide. Think in very simple terms about scenarios, only quantify those that are material. Think about the risk management framework, and the WBC SBTi guide will help you there. Look at your governance structure and set some initial targets. That would be my approach. Just a final comment on the practical guide to GRI and SASB. The reason we wrote it is our customers kept saying to us, oh, which standard should we use? We can't report to all of these standards. It might be good for you consultants, but it's not very good for us as reporters, and therefore we need some consolidation. And one of the things that we realised working with GRI and SASB, to Rajesh's point, is they are complementary. They are trying to do different things. I'd like to think they could be put together, but the guide we produced was really to say, in this stage, how do you use them? What do you use GRI for? What do you use SASB for? And it was really in response to many of our customers seeking simplicity and needing some guidance. So I'd certainly recommend downloading it and reading it.
Yes, great. Yeah, Abigail, I understand that you have done quite a bit of research on lack of harmonization is an obstacle for reporting. Would you want to share your findings?
Thanks, Esther. Yeah, I think we've been looking at things also through, today the discussion has been through the reporter's lens, right? And they have difficulties, like you said, having to look at so many different standards. What do I choose from this buffet, right? It can be quite confusing. And I think we did some research actually from the users, right? The investor lens, right? What is decision useful for the investors? So these are investors like, it could be big fund managers, it could be your banks, right? The financiers, or it could be actually your everyday pension fund investors. So what came across to us really strongly when we were looking at this space was that investors find that actually they really need comparable, consistent, and reliable sustainability-related disclosures, right? And they want it to be able to use it to be able to properly price their risks, be able to understand where to direct the capital flows. But however, from our research, we found that actually this isn't what they were getting with the current landscape, and there were a few pain points. So one of the pain points, which seems to be a pain point on both sides of the fence, is that there's so many, right? From the reporter side, it's like, I don't know what to pick, how to put this together. And then for the investor, when they look at the report, because everybody, as Esther, you said, right, everybody kind of like picks what they think is more relevant to them. But when they pick up two reports, the investor actually has no comparability. Sometimes even within the same sector, they can't compare, much less across sectors or across jurisdictions, across geographies. So that was a pain point that came across quite strongly to us when we looked at this space. The other two points actually, which might be useful for reporters to think about, is investors said that financial statements do not actually link to the sustainability reporting. There's this kind of like disjoint, so they didn't know how it kind of like impacted the financial statements. And the other point was assurance, right? The rate of independent assurance was low, and therefore sometimes the investors looking at the report, they didn't know what to think about the report, don't know what to think about the metrics. So these were the three main things which I thought might be useful to share out, so that reporters here also kind of like know what their investors want. So, I mean, given all that, that's why that's kind of like this global movement and momentum to see if we can kind of like help the situation and develop a global baseline standard, right? Something which is kind of like a base module, and then people kind of add on. So I think that's kind of like where we hope the world is going to go moving forward. Thanks, Esther.
Wonderful. Okay, Pratima, you have quite a number of questions in the chat box. I try to group them together. Okay, there are 5 standard, institutions. Okay, 2 are actually climate related. Yours is carbon related, and then there's a CDSP, climate disclosure standard also. And there are quite a lot of questions. It's like asking, CDP has made such great progress, but what is CDP in this whole equation of harmonization? Okay, first question. Secondly is SBTi, science-based target, which is one of the toughest that we have actually spent almost 8-9 months to, get it approved by science-based targets to set the carbon reduction intensity target in 2018. And now we have to also review it already. So carbon management is actually on the top of the footprint. So how do we, tap onto CDP's, advice and, to help us harmonize it into, with the TCFD, with, IRC, GRI, SSB, and also meeting the needs of, investors. And the next question will be for all panelists also, is about data integrity assurance. Yeah, so I have a colleague here from my ACCA also asked, like, who should be, holding the reporters accountable for the data credibility and integrity. So, I mean, personally, I only want to read a report that with external assurance. So for CDP also, you also allow, a reporter to opt not to post it publicly, or allow that. But in the spirit of transparency, what will be CDP's ideal situation? Yeah,
absolutely. So let me just tackle it. So I kind of see 3 questions, right? Harmonization, how does SBTi sort of fit into all of this, and the question of integrity. In terms of harmonizing and just kind of picking up where Rajesh and John also mentioned, I think the way we sort of work with companies on the ground who, try to figure out, and I've actually put a link on how the ESG standard setters and CDP are coming together to think along the lines of comprehensive reporting system, and to kind of take off right from the beginning of this discussion where John was talking about financial accounting, and so. We now have some sort of a common, we have a common understanding on financial accounting, because there's a level of transparency and disclosure that we can make sense of in financial terms. And so the idea is start off with your financial accounting. Overlaying that will be ESG metrics that have financial impact, and that is essentially your TCFD and your value reporting or SASB, IARC. So those two they work very well, they get integrated, and the whole purpose of these ESG metrics is linking to financial impact. So start off with these two, but then do the GRI standard, because the GRI standard is focuses on entire sustainability needs, and it's a communication strategy tool to be able to touch and speak with different stakeholders of your business. And it's important to maintain that communication from a sustainability perspective. And so the reason why we kind of, I particularly like these sort of building blocks, as I call them, is because as our understanding of the financial implications of sustainability rises, right now we have certain ESG metrics that are identified under SASB. We have certain climate metrics that are identified under the TCFD. But that's not to say that we wouldn't start having a better understanding of the remainder of the sustainability metrics, which are identified under GRI. So have that dynamism built into your sustainability reporting and ensure that it actually links with your financial reporting. So that's sort of, just a really quick summary on that. Where does SBTi fit in? SBTi, we have already started monitoring SBTi goals within our questionnaires. So under the TCFD, so as our questionnaires are fully aligned with the TCFD, for companies that are now providing their targets, the next question we ask is, are these targets validated under the Science Based Targets Initiative or any other initiative that you might have picked on? Are these net zero targets? We started monitoring them year on year from this year onwards. So that monitoring will come in. With respect to integrity of the data, I think this is where I also kind of go back and forth, because a lot of companies disclose data, sustainability data, but they don't get that verified through a third party. And there's a lot of financial institutions that come up to CDP sometime and they'll say, oh, you have all this excellent data. Is it verified? And I have to tell them, I'm not an audit firm. I'm a standard setter. You don't ask the IFRS to audit or verify the data that's produced by companies. That's the job of the big fours and all of the other audit firms that are out there. And once the understanding of financial opportunity comes in from financial institutions, hopefully that verification and the need for verification will really sort of start coming in. So that's sort of where I'll kind of stop here to see if I've missed anything in your questions or I need to elaborate on anything more.
No, you did perfectly well. So the other panelists, and can you help us to address that, the assurance and also the data integrities and all? Yeah, anyone, please, Jamie, anytime. Yeah.
So on the, why don't I try the sort of data integrity and insurance side? It would be wrong of me from PwC not to at least respond. I mean, I think data is a really big challenge. I mean, it's recognised by regulators as they begin to ask, companies to disclose against TCFD, and certainly the stress tests that the Bank of England are putting banks and insurers through. Data is going to be a really key problem. And so, I think corporate reported data will get you so far. But, if you're thinking about, physical climate risks to a large global property company, you've really got to understand the geolocation of the assets and, to place that burden onto a company to say, can you tell us the exact location of every operating asset you have everywhere in the world that is material to your balance sheet or P&L, I think would be too far. There are very good databases that come out of regulatory disclosures, again, particularly on climate. So, we, for the modelling that we do, buy-in data is very good on oil and gas and coal. It's quite good on steel. It's quite good on cement. But you get into supply chain, it's almost impossible. And one of the questions that flashed up early on was, what is the benefit to a small and mid-sized company of reporting? Well, there's a very good chance you're in a supply chain of a larger company, and those companies will be asking you for that data. So you're doing it for good commercial reasons, more so than perhaps disclosure to investors, or if you're a private company, probably not disclosing at all. So data is a real issue. And then, how do we know about data integrity? Well, a lot of the work that we do at PwC is looking at the controls around data. A little bit like when we're trying to identify that $1 million of sales, we want to see the invoices. So if we're verifying carbon emissions, we want to see, the electricity bills. We want to see the measurement of carbon. We want to verify it. And so there is clearly a role for assurance. As one of the other speakers said, the standard setters will set the standard. The market will respond if assurance is demanded. I think investors increasingly want assurance, but in the EU, it is likely that assurance providers will become regulated, and therefore you will have to become accredited to enable you to enter that market. And I think that will sort out the quality of verification around ESG standards to those that have got the right experience.
Okay, Rajesh or
Yes.
Abigail? Yeah, any thoughts on the integrity? Yeah,
Yes,
we are
yes,
going to try to aim to end it before 5:15 because there's so many questions.
Sure.
Yes, Rajesh, yeah.
So as the data integrity has become very important now, we all know that trillions of dollars are in the pipeline flowing into businesses, ideas, companies which sound or say they are green, and there's a lot of interest. So there's a lot of capital which is going to find its way into such companies and such claims. So I think it's extremely important for investors and also for the entire market to function smoothly and without any blemish, that the data integrity is secured. So while assurance is one of the straightforward ways that there's a third-party independent external verification of data, at least the key data sets in the report. And the Big Four do that. We also do that. We are one of the earliest licensed AA1000 assurance provider. But in my view, I think the most important part here is to get the board on board, because once the board has the accepts that the sustainability is something which is very crucial, critical for the business, then the board members, they start asking the right questions. And when the board members, they start asking the right questions, I think the management makes all efforts to provide and submit the data which is really correct and has certain degree of authenticity and integrity. And I also want to quote Singapore's example, which is SGX, where just by one element which is not common across other jurisdictions. So one of the requirements is that there should be a board statement in the sustainability report, and sustainability report has been squarely placed on the shoulders of the board members as collective responsibility. So just by that, what has happened that there is more, the boards are more alert, but I think we need to do more on that. And so how do you get boards buy-in? I think regulation is one of the ways, making sustainability, climate and sustainability risk management, making their fiduciary duty and so on. It's a complex issue, but I think if we don't address this, we are going to get into a situation where we will have scandals, we will have greenwashing, and already we have had a couple of cases. So we want to avoid that.
Okay, Abigail.
Hi, Esther. Thanks, Rajesh. I think you've hit quite a lot of the issues that I wanted to share as well. So on SGX, I just wanted to share that assurance is something that actually will be consulted upon in the coming months. So that is one of the pillar of sustainability reporting, right? I think we're all in agreement on the same page here that it's important. So I think there are different levels of assurance. What kind of level of assurance? Whose assurance do you look for? So those are things that SGX will be coming out to get some views on, and then we'll have to land on where we want to take that. But I think Rajesh's point about the board, that's really key, like mindset, the tone from the top. That's really something I think we can do more of. And I think wearing my SID ESG committee hat, of which Esther is on the committee as well, that's something that we're really mindful of. And I think if you put expectations and regulations and requirements on companies and boards, I think it's also our responsibility to do a parallel track on capacity building, right? You have to build people up, give them the resources. I mean, on TCFD, it's great. You have all these free resources, scenarios and all out there. But I think in terms of educating the board, I think SID, we're going to roll out quite a few programs. And I think one of the ones is actually thinking about with SGX there's a listed entity director course. So that one is compulsory for directors. Definitely need to think about putting in a sustainability disclosure and awareness course on that. So that's something I think we'll be working on as well. So thanks for that as well, Rajesh.
Okay, we only have about 3-4 minutes. Let's do a lightning round to wrap up today's discussion. And just give me 1 or 2 issues that will sum up the future of sustainability reporting in the next 1 to 2 years. John, let's start with you.
Yeah, keep it simple and do it quick. I think I've been quite vocal about the need for, fewer metrics, simplified standards, and, the World Economic Forum, their stakeholder capitalism metrics is an attempt to do that. Do it quick, because if you believe the scientists like I do, what we don't get done in 10 years on climate and nature will never get done. So we have 2 business cycles to get this right.
Great, thank you, John. And Pratima?
And the 2 kind of points I want to raise is this is a roadmap to get started. It's not just a reporting exercise. It's an enterprise risk management exercise. It fits into your business strategy. It informs how your business is going to transform going forward. So, to look at it from a enterprise risk management approach rather than just a reporting approach.
Wonderful value creation. Abigail?
Hi, I think Pratima has hit the nail on the head. And for me, I think it's about starting small and acting fast. You can't boil the ocean, perfection, the enemy of the good. So I think you should just really start even on standard setting, whether we can get something baseline. Let's get that so we get the world started. So that's one. And second, I've spoken about capacity building. I think that's the 2 main things that we have to think about coming months. Thanks.
Wonderful. Rajesh?
So as I say that, we should stop worrying about the future of reporting now, because to me, it looks like that after 20 years of struggle that you have been part of that, Esther. Now we know that the future of reporting is very secure, and the problems that we have, we call here in Asia like happy problems. So I think that's something not the question now. So the question now is, what's the future of those companies which do not report or which do not take sustainability reporting seriously? So investors, for example, now are in agreement that a company's future value cannot be assessed correctly without understanding how it manages its climate-related risks and opportunities and whole host of other issues, risks and opportunities. So I think the key question is that what companies are going to do and what everyone else in the marketplace, regulators and consultants and leaders like yourself, what are we going to do to help companies to really come on board and before it's too late, bring up and raise the bar and also take their reporting and disclosure to the next level.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And all the panelists and all the participants, I never have such an engaging, session with so many questions that I have answered that there are a lot of questions on SME. We are going to have one dedicated session on SME. We know that we need a 1 whole hour or 1.5 hours to deep dive into helping SMEs to come on board. So that is definitely in the plan. The second one is about science-based target, because again, this is a subject we need to deep dive into it. And we're going to host an event on that. And with that, let me thank all the panelists and all my partners, Sustainability Academy, SGX, SID, Center for Governance and Sustainability and NUS Business School, ESCAP, Sustainable Business Council, and Global Compact Network Singapore. By the way, all these partners have very, very good insight and capacity to help you build your knowledge and, to fast track in your sustainability reporting journey. And with this, thank you very much. And look out for the YouTube channel and on www.cdlsustainability.com. And with that, and a happy Friday and have a good weekend ahead. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye and thank you.